Germany state stereotypes. Balanced style. If you've ever met someone from Germany, you might think you know what Germans are like. Serious, efficient, punctual. Maybe a little cold. But the truth is, Germany is not one personality, it's a country made up of very different regions, and each one has its own identity, accent, habits, pride, and stereotypes. Some states are seen as rich and traditional. Others are loud and party-loving. Some are thought of as reserved and hard-working. Others are considered artsy, rebellious, or just completely impossible to understand. And whether the stereotypes are fair or not, Germans themselves love joking about them. So today, we're diving into the states of Germany not to insult anyone, but to explore the funny, surprising, and sometimes painfully accurate stereotypes that people associate with each region. Let's start in the south. Bavaria, Germany's Texas. If Germany had a state that constantly reminded everyone it was special, it would be Bavaria. Bavaria is the biggest state in Germany, and it carries itself like a country within a country. It is traditional, wealthy, conservative, and extremely proud of its identity. A lot of Bavarians don't even describe themselves as German. First they say they're Bavarian. That pride shows up in everything: the dialect, the food, the clothing, the festivals, and the local attitude. Bavarians are often stereotyped as wearing lederhosen, drinking giant beers, eating white sausages for breakfast, and showing up to Oktoberfest in September, even though it feels like the whole world has decided the party starts too early. People from outside Bavaria often joke that Bavarians are the Texans of Germany, proud, traditional, and convinced their way of life is the best way of life. And to be fair, Bavaria does have a lot to brag about. Munich is clean, wealthy, and full of parks. BMW and Audi are associated with the region, and the state has a strong economy. But Bavarians are also often seen as a little arrogant by other Germans. They're the ones who will loudly defend their traditions while the rest of the country rolls its eyes. That tension is part of what makes Bavaria such a powerful identity inside Germany. Berlin, dirty, cool, and impossible to ignore. If Bavaria is tradition, Berlin is chaos. Berlin is the capital, but culturally it feels like its own universe. It is messy, political, creative, and full of contradictions. People love it, hate it, move there, complain about it, and then refuse to leave. Berliners are often stereotyped as rude, direct, and brutally honest. They don't sugarcoat things. If they don't like you, you'll know immediately. But many people also respect that attitude because it feels real. There's no fake politeness, no pretending, no unnecessary performance. The city itself has a reputation for being edgy and alternative. People imagine techno clubs, dark clothes, vegan dinner, cafes full of laptops, and endless debates about art, politics, and identity. Berlin is also known as a magnet for artists, students, foreigners, and people who want to start over. Of course, Berlin also gets a lot of criticism. It's often described as dirty, disorganized, and full of weird energy. Even other Germans joke about how people from Berlin think Berlin is the center of the universe. But that's part of its identity. Berlin is not trying to be perfect. It's trying to be alive. And somehow, that makes it one of the most important places in Germany. Hamburg, rich, cool, and a little cold. If Berlin is messy cool, Hamburg is polished cool. Hamburg is known as one of Germany's wealthiest cities, and that wealth is part of its image. The city has a big port, elegant neighborhoods, beautiful waterfront areas, and a strong business culture. People from Hamburg are often stereotyped as reserved, direct, and a little too proud of their city. They are also seen as more refined than the average German city stereotype. Not flashy like Munich, not chaotic like Berlin. Hamburg is supposed to be calm, expensive, and self-assured. Some people joke that Hamburgers think they're better than everyone else because they have a port, money, and stylish bars. There's also a strong cultural divide inside the city. St. Pauli, for example, is famous for nightlife, left-leaning culture, and countercultural energy, while other parts of the city feel more polished and upper class. Hamburgers are also stereotyped as being cold in personality. Maybe because of the weather. Maybe because of the city's North Sea mentality. But underneath that coolness is a strong sense of identity and urban confidence. Frankfurt, banks, business, and brutal first impressions. If you ask people outside Germany what Frankfurt is, many will say one thing: banks. Frankfurt has a very different image from other German cities. It's the country's finance capital, home to skyscrapers, global companies, and the European Central Bank. Because of that, it is often seen as fast, corporate, and expensive. But Frankfurt also has a darker stereotype. Many people say the first impression of the city is the central station area, and that area can be chaotic, rough, and uncomfortable. Because of this, outsiders sometimes assume the whole city is dangerous or ugly, even though Frankfurt has much more to offer than that one part. The city is often portrayed as business first and personality second. It's a place for flights, contracts, banks, and people who are always in a hurry. Compared to places like Berlin or Cologne, Frankfurt feels less playful and more efficient. Still, it has a skyline unlike almost anywhere else in Germany, and that alone gives it a distinct identity. It's the city that looks the most international and sometimes the least emotionally German. Cologne, friendly, fun and beer, obsessed. Then there's Cologne, a city with a reputation for being warm, lively, and extremely social. Cologne is often described as one of the friendliest major cities in Germany. People there are more outgoing, more talkative, and less formal than in other regions. The culture is shaped by carnival, humor, local pride, and a serious love for beer. In Cologne, beer is not just a drink, it's a social system. Klisch is almost a religion there, and the city's identity is tightly tied to its traditions. People from Cologne are often stereotyped as being cheerful, relaxed, and a little chaotic in the best way. The city also has a big LGBTQ+ presence and a reputation for openness. Many Germans see Cologne as a place where people can just be themselves without too much judgment. Other Germans sometimes tease Cologne for being too loud, too proud, or too obsessed with its own culture. But Cologne wears that image well. It doesn't try to be cool, it just is. Bavaria versus the North. One of the biggest cultural jokes in Germany is the divide between the South and the North. The South, especially Bavaria, is seen as traditional, wealthy, and proud. The North is often described as cooler, quieter, more reserved, and less dramatic. Northern Germans are sometimes stereotyped as emotionally distant, direct, and not overly expressive. People from the North are often portrayed as practical, dry, and a little rough around the edges. They don't talk as much, don't show as much emotion, and often prefer understatement to performance. Even the weather plays into the stereotype: wind, rain, gray skies, and a generally more serious mood. This doesn't mean one region is better than the other. It just means Germany's geography has created very different social identities. The sea, the mountains, the old borders, and the historical divisions all shaped how people live and how they see themselves. Saxony, the state everyone argues about. Saxony is one of those places that gets a lot of jokes and a lot of criticism. Some of that comes from its dialect, which many Germans find difficult to understand or funny. Some of it comes from politics, since the state has a reputation for being more conservative than other parts of the country. And some of it comes from old East German history, which still affects attitudes today. Saxony is often portrayed as proud, stubborn, and defensive. People from there are said to be strong in their opinions and not very interested in outside criticism. Dresden in particular carries a lot of self-image, while Leipzig is often seen as younger, more progressive, and more open-minded. But Saxony is also beautiful, historically rich, and culturally important. The stereotypes tell only part of the story. Like everywhere else in Germany, the reality is more complicated than the jokes. Schleswig-Holstein and the North Sea mood at the far northern edge. Schleswig-Holstein has a very different energy. This state is associated with the sea, wind, rain, and a more Scandinavian-feeling lifestyle. People are often seen as calm, weather-hardened, and practical. It's the kind of place where coats matter, the weather shapes the mood, and the sea is part of everyday identity. There's also a strong coastal pride here. People feel connected to boats, beaches, wind energy, and a slower rhythm of life. It's less flashy than the big cities, but that's part of its charm. The stereotype is not that people here are loud, it's that they are steady. Germany is often seen from the outside as one country with one culture. But the truth is much more interesting. Each state has its own personality, and those personalities create endless jokes, rivalries, and stereotypes. Some of those stereotypes are exaggerated. Some are unfair. But many contain a small piece of truth enough to make them funny, memorable, and culturally revealing. And maybe that's what makes Germany so interesting. It's not one unified personality. It's a country of regional identities, each one proudly insisting it is the real Germany.